And so, the most widely used evangelism methodology in the world is Alpha. And a very, very, very effective tool in many, and that's an Anglican tool used by just about everybody in different movements. And some groups don't use it for some theological reasons, but even so, the idea of Alpha is central. Now, for some of you, you've got this, you got the 3 streams thing, and that just complicates it for you guys. 2 of your streams are probably going to be comfortable with Alpha. Your 3rd stream is probably not going to be as comfortable with Alpha. Mm-hmm. You say, well, we don't want to use that because of different reasons in there. Fine. But what I would say is, what Alpha has tapped into is the idea that people can, in conversation and community, discuss, consider, and be challenged by the claims of Christ. And so you say, well, I don't want to use Alpha. Well, fine, then use Christianity, Explored. Use something that talks about the claims of Christ. But so I think what I would say is that it is more natural for you as a movement to do evangelistic activity in community in organized fashions. I just remember the many Faith Alives, right? And how many people would come, and it would be a church-based event, and they didn't even invite their friends, but how many people we'd see come to Christ in some of those Faith Alives. Right. And so there's a sense that community matters. What I would say is this, is that there's going to be a sense, too, where you can discover some new ways. Mm-hmm. Again, don't turn tools into rules, right? And that's what we do. Now, the only way we win people to Christ is go and do so-and-so. But what I would say is find means of outreach. Now, outreach is not evangelism, but outreach can lead to evangelism. Outreach creates an environment for evangelism. So what I would say is, you could do a block party, and just our church plant is going to be starting a church, and outside of Plano, Texas, or for that matter, in Everett, Washington. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get this park, and we're going to get some music, and we're going to do some stuff, and we're just going to bless the community and minister to them and share Christ in them. Now, you don't have to end with some guy up on a bullhorn calling everybody sinners with a big sign saying repent. There are, and if you feel called to do that, that's fine too. But what I would say is that we need to ask the question, not how do we like evangelism, right. If it's a bullhorn or if it's a small group. We need to ask the question, how can we faithfully proclaim the gospel in the culture we find ourselves? I think that's going to be in community, it's going to be in relationships, it's going to be things where basically skeptics and inquirers can have a safe conversation, and I think you're good at that. I think you can flow in that.
Let's touch on that for a second. Alpha, church puts it on, bring your friends, great, inviting, hearing the gospel.
Right.
Are there practical ways that we can equip our lay people to actually proclaim the gospel?
I think you have to.
How do we do that?
Again, if evangelism is invitationalism, and I'll give you an example. I had a child come up to me, and my tradition, they're much like the kind of some of the age. There are certain steps along the way. In my tradition, kid gets 8 or 9 years old, their parents start talking to them about trusting in Christ. So this young boy came up to me after church. I'm the interim pastor of this church, and with his parents. And mom and dad said, little Johnny wants to pray to receive Jesus. Would you pray with him? And I said, no. And it was as if I cut the head off of a goat and threw it on the altar. I mean, it was...
no, I will not lead you to Christ.
And they just didn't know, what do you do with this? I said, no, I think Johnny genuinely needs to, repent of his sins and trust and follow Christ. But why would you want me to do that? I mean, this is your son.
Wow.
Why don't you go home and talk to him and pray with him? They left mad at me. They probably went and talked to me about 10 people, right? But I'm the interim, so what are they going to do, fire me? Well, they came back a couple weeks later, and they thanked me. And they said, thank you so much. We went home, because they said to me, when I said no, they said, but he's got questions. And I said, but he's 8. I mean, is he struggling with the ontological arguments of the existence of God? Is he working through a theodicy proof? I mean, what's the deal? He just wanted to know how a big Jesus can fit in my little heart.
Yeah.
And when he prayed to receive Christ, and came back and he said, little Johnny's prayed to receive Christ, been born again, and they shared all this with me, and it was such a remarkable and wonderful thing, and they thanked me for saying no.
Absolutely.
Well, here's what I would say. I would say to all the pastors and church planners, when you do for people what God has called them to do, everybody gets hurt, and the mission of God gets hindered. Wow. Let me say it again so you don't miss it. When you do for people what God has called them to do, everybody gets hurt, and the mission of God gets hindered. You can't create a movement when you are the funnel point of the movements. People need to be sharing Christ with others who are sharing Christ with others. So how do you do that? Well, again, I think the standard evangelical pickup line for about 30 years has been, hey, if you were to die today, Do you know for sure whether you go to heaven or hell? Well, even EE now has provided, Evangelism Explosion. I met with their leadership recently because I did a study. If you're interested in that question, by the way, I did a study of 1,002 random Americans, and I asked them, how often do you wonder, if I were to die today, do I know for sure I go to heaven or hell? This is why I love running a research team, right? What percentage of Americans do you think wondered every day, if I were to die today, do I know for sure I go to heaven or hell? What do you think?
0.
You're all wrong. It was 20%.
Wow.
That's what I said.
Wow.
I'm like, who are these people? Are they in hospitals? I mean, what's the deal? Is it a whole army unit waiting to deploy? I mean, I didn't know what the deal was.
Not coming to my church.
They don't go to my church either. And it was higher among certain ethnic groups and certain. And so,
Wow.
but what we found is that 42% never wondered that question. Now, let me give you an example. My dad's not a Christian, right? And I don't mean like he's a Methodist. Sometimes we say they're, another denomination. I'm not saying that.
In the other conferences, he says Anglican or
Yeah,
Episcopal.
exactly.
Right? I know.
Well, whenever you're with a group, they're like, oh, he's so. No, my dad's not a Christian. But my dad never wonders if he died. But he does wonder, how can I find more meaning and purpose in my life? He does wonder, what's the meaning of life? And so for my dad, beginning the question, if you were to die today, do you know for sure? It's just not the right starting point. Now, even EE, which made popular EE is Evangelism Explosion. D. James Kennedy, the Presbyterian guy, made popular this very famous evangelism strategy. They now have another place where they begin with purpose and meaning. And so what I would say is that when I grew up Catholic. That's not even fair. The Catholic Church was the church we didn't go to. I grew up outside of New York City, Irish Catholic, so we were, here's why. I knew there was a God, I just couldn't know him. Mm-hmm. I knew he wrote a book, I just couldn't understand it. And so when someone came to me and said, look, I said, I had enough of a preconceived notion that the gospel could be explained to me. I think what you find now is people start further away from the understanding of the gospel. Yeah. And so I think it's necessary. And sometimes there are 3 conversions, and I'm going to answer the next question much shorter. 3 conversions, right? The first conversion is the conversion to you. Yeah. They just need to know you're okay. They need to know that you're a normal person who's not crazy, and then they say, you know what? This person has something meaningful and real in their life. What I found now is the second conversion is the conversion to community. Maybe they'll come and talk about this in a discussion with others. Maybe they'll come see what God's doing in your church. Then the third conversion tends to be the conversion to Christ. Yeah. Now, you go back 50 years ago, and you hear these stories, and it's like, well, here's what the Bible says. The wages of sin is death. Really? I didn't know that. When I say to my dad, the wages of sin is death, my dad says, I don't believe in sin. Yeah. And everyone goes to heaven. There's only 4 people in hell, according to my dad. It's Hitler, Stalin, and his 3rd grade teacher. And nobody else is in hell. Well, so we got to start, and we got to walk that journey, and it's a journey much more than it was simply a moment in time when someone was boom, and I get it.
I hear you saying you got to know people, know the questions they're asking, so training people to understand how to ask questions, to draw people out from where they are. Yeah. And then very simply, an 8-year-old boy, you don't have to give some theological rendition of why the rapture is the way to heaven, being very clear about the gospel presentation.
We need to probably talk about the rapture later, but other than that, yes.
Let me move on here for a second. Great question. Given what you know about the Anglican Church, the renewal that's going on, and our current DNA, what might need to change in order for us to become more effective in church planting?
That's my
Given
talk
what you know
tonight.
Oh.
It's if I were or this afternoon, they moved me. If I were an Anglican.
Great.
And so I pass. Next up.
Next question. What are the character and gifting traits that you've discovered are common in the most successful biblical church planners? How can we identify them? How do we know what their gifts are? How can we identify them and then send them out?
That is a great question. Couple things. First, I'm going to talk about this some tonight. I think that you need to give more people permission to plant churches and have higher standards for people you fund to plant churches. Those are 2 simultaneous things. Anytime you're going to have a movement, if you're going to plant 1,000 churches, you're going to have more people planting those churches. I think it might be like the Little Rock story. Many of you read the Little Rock story, and how the lay people there got involved, and I don't know if some of those people are here, but how they got involved in planting that church. A fascinating story. It's online. It's a PDF. You can read it. You're going to have to find a lot more people like that planting churches. Roland Allen, one of your famous Anglican missiologists. One of my points tonight is look back to Roland Allen. And he wrote a book called The Case for Voluntary Clergy. I think ultimately you're going to have to make some space for that. Here's the deal when it comes to church planting. If you want 1,000, which I got to tell you, I'm kind of impressed. A little scared for you, but kind of impressed. By the way, that's the evangelical free church. You're going to plant the evangelical free church in the next 5 years. Wow. No pressure. You're going to plant the free. Not a small, struggling denomination. All right. So here's what I would say. To me, I describe church planting today as this, and many of you are right here. There are many of you can't find money. You can't find planters. You're out of resources, and it looks to me like the checkout line at Walmart. You go to Walmart, particularly on a Saturday. I love Walmart. I take pictures and put them on Twitter because it's such a cross-cultural experience to go to Walmart. It's like the people of Walmart.com is my favorite website. You need to check it out. It'll change your life. Well, I was at Walmart recently, and there were 16 registers that are closed, one that's open, and we're all like 15 people deep in this one register. And so I took a picture of it and said, this is, planning and work. And here's what I would say. That's what church planting looks like in a lot of ways in Anglicanism today. You've got a long line of people who are maybe waiting, saying, maybe many here saying, if I get the funding, I get the resourcing, I can find the right place. It's time to open up those other lanes.
How do we do that?
You open up those other lanes by giving some people permission to relate people to plant churches, by creating a system of voluntary clergy and different credentialing. You're not going to like that. I'm going to talk about that tonight. You're not going to like that. You're going to say, but we have to ensure theological orthodoxy through theological education, which I find deeply ironic considering your current history.
Terry, not all of our current history, Terry.
Not all of it. I will tell you that I'm on the faculty of 2 seminaries. I'm on the faculty of Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. I'm in Chicago. I'm the faculty of Southeastern Seminary in Raleigh-Durham. I'm teaching with most of your people, most of your leaders at Gordon Conwell. I believe I have 4 seminary degrees. They do not ensure orthodoxy, or else your former friends would be the most orthodox people in the world. What I would say to you is this, is that you have to find a way. And here's what I consult with denominations about this all the time, is that if you have a system right now, right, this room for your global presence is way too white. And what you have systems already that you're going to raise up people who are from South America, who are from Asia, who are from Africa, and you create alternative credentialing structures. It's time to open up those alternative credentialing structures to all kinds of church planters and to ensure orthodoxy through community and commitment to the Word of God and to the theology that drives you. And then to provide in-service theological education. Your seminaries need to be partners on the process. So that's going to open up some new lanes. Now, the other thing is you've got to now have, and this is a totally different subject, right? You've got to have more church planters by getting more permission to people. But then if you're going to fund church planters, and you do, right? I've coached many of your funded church planters, and every one I have coached I've been pleased with. Don't misunderstand. I've never taken a coaching assignment. I didn't think someone could do it. But what I would say to you is this, is that if you're going to fund church planters, you should send them through a robust assessment that determines do they have the wiring and the gifting. Church planting is not just a theological category, it is an entrepreneurial category. And there are characteristics that church planters have. We're doing the largest statistically validated study ever done right now on the subject. We have 11 denominations participating in this, and we're asking those kind of questions. Well, here's what we found. There's a study about 20 years old on assessment. Charles Ridley did it. If you don't have visionizing capacity, if you don't have the ability to relate to lost and other unchurched people, if you don't have the ability to start things, let me give you an example. If you have never started anything in your life, a church plant is not the first time to try. Right? Now, I'm not saying I'm the best church planter in the world or anything of that sort, but I started 2 businesses in high school. I started 3 organizations in college. I love starting things. I'm not so good at finishing, but I love starting things, right? If you got ADD, God could be calling you to be a church planter right there. So, and so you're in. All right. So I think a big part of it is the entrepreneurial gifting. And you have to find those things. And what I would say is I would want a much more robust process. You're sort of in the stage as a movement where you're like, well, and you're going to say we want 1,000. You're going to say, man, we'll take anybody right now. What happens is, and I'll give you an example. The Nazarenes, right? And I have permission to share this story. The Nazarene, good people, love Jesus. They cast this big goal, we're going to plant a bunch of churches, right? And so they started, if you're going to plant a bunch of churches, then everyone's got to do it. So like, if you had a pulse, you were a church planter. Well, what happened was it went badly. And 2 to 3 years in, they had so many failures. In the Nazarene church today, if you go to their boot camp, that's how they train you to be a church planter, and you say the words church planting, they fine you because church planting has such a bad reputation in their denomination, they now call it New Starts because it went so badly.
So badly, why? 2 or 3 things to warn us from.
Unprepared and poorly wired church planters. That's the big issue. Unprepared and poorly wired church planters. Just because you can't find a church doesn't mean God has called you to plant a church. That's a wrong reason to plant a church.
Said.
Now listen, I'm going to give you permission. If you want to go in one of the other 15 lanes, I think anyone, now again, I have a very low church polity. That's, so remember, I'm a low church evangelical. But in my understanding, I think anyone should go. When I planted my first church, I was 21, planted my first church in the inner city of Buffalo, New York, among the urban poor, and my denomination turned me down to be a church planter. Right? Now, in my polity, I said, but God told me, so I went anyway, right? And then 6 months later, we started reaching people, and my denomination said, hey, can we count you now that you're actually there and working? Right. And, denominations like to count. What I would say is I have no problem with anybody who feels calls planting a church, because I got turned down and did it unfunded. I blew insulation in the day, I went to seminary in the night, and I planted a church on the weekends. I believe you give people permission. But what I would say is that doesn't mean that everyone who has permission to plant has funding to plant. People who have funding to plant need to have a certain wiring, gifting, and preparation to do it. And most church planters in the early stage of a movement that tries to get it going need to be weeded out. Let me say this, and I'll shut up. If you have an assessment process and everyone passes, you don't have an assessment process. And I've seen a lot of your church planters pass assessment that need to go through. You need to have a process. Here's what you need. If you're going to plant 1,000 churches, you really need to plant 2,000 churches to have 1,000 churches probably in 5 years. And so that means you're going to have to find about 6,000 people willing to plant a church. You're going to have to screen out 2,000 in the first conversation. You're going to have to screen out the next 2,000 in the subsequent in-depth interviews. And then 2,000 we're going to go plant churches. You're going to have 1,000 churches in 5 years. No pressure. You can do it.
Yeah, then we can do it. All right, well, one of the major challenges we're facing, we've got 5 more minutes here. Let me end with 2 questions.
Yeah, 5 minutes? I can't answer one question in 5 minutes.
This question is going to get me in trouble, but it's a question, and I'm just going to read it.
Yeah, uh-oh.
Most of the leaders in the Anglican Church were trained as pastors and teachers. Yeah. They love to pastor people, to walk with them through the challenges of life. Most bishops find their job as pastoring their leaders. Yeah. How do we change our structures to help our senior leaders and our bishops to continue pastoring, but also equipping and launching out church planting across North America?
Wow, you really want me to weigh in on that? Here's what I would say, is that it's not an issue with your movement. It's an issue with structures. Okay, if I had a yo-yo, I could illustrate, which is, I know, a strange phrase, but let me just see something here for just a second. If you take this right here, and I don't know what I just unplugged, so the music people might want to check this later. But whatever it is, it ain't working anymore. And you kind of spin this around. There are 2 forces. You're a little nervous about
Yeah, I'll move back a little bit.
There are 2 forces that are at work here. One is pushing it outward. It's what we call the centrifugal force. It's more than that. It's inertia. It's other things. But one's pushing it outward. That's supposed to be in every movement. And right now, you can harness that in very powerful ways as you go from a small movement and the movement grows and the inertia pushes it outward. But anytime there's a movement, right, here's the goal, right, the outward expansion. Anytime there's movement, there's always a string. Something, and that exercises the centripetal force, right? So it's pulling it in. When you plant a church, it starts, and you have a little string, right? You start, and you basically need someone to watch the kids and someone to lead the music, and that's it. You're just little teeny thing. But you need a string. If you start a house church, someone's going to open their door, set out the chairs, and put out the cookies. And so there's always something that's there. But what happens is over time with a church or a movement, what happens is it grows, and in order to support the expanding mission and ministry, the string turns into a rope, turns into a tether. It's necessary. Listen, every church planter wishes there was no structure, and every person in denominational leadership knows you need more structure. And so there's always this tension that's there. But what happens over time in your church, think about this in your church before we even talk about the movement, is that over time, the tether gets so big and take so much to maintain that soon all you're doing is trying to get enough people to service the tether, and you've lost the outward focus of the mission. It happens every church, every time. Eventually you get there. What I would say to you is the same thing happens in denominations, in church, in national movements. Is that it starts lean and focused, and then what happens is you have to support it. Now, what I would say to you is you need. I just recently consulted with the Assemblies of God in a 3-year process, and we drastically increased their national support system. Now, why? Because they didn't have enough. Well, it is the normal order of things that the tether becomes the focus. Here's what has to happen. What you have to do is to keep the mission back to the center. And what happens is you say to the people, to the church, to the body, to the denomination, that if this is what we value, how do our structures line up with our values? Listen, I hear movements all the time say, we believe in church planting, yet no one at the national meeting ever talks about it. None of the funding is in place for it. None of the resources are in place for it. And I can tell, listen, I did a big study for Leadership Network and listed the 5 leading church planting denominations in America. I've had the privilege of preaching at, I think, 3 of the 5 of their meetings. And I got to tell you, their focus, their structure, and their resourcing is about church planting. What you celebrate, you become. So what I would say is this. There are certain theological things that you believe that have to be supported in the structure. That's what makes you Anglican. Okay, I may not agree with them, and that's fine. But there are certain structures that need to be there because of your understanding of the episcopate, because of your understanding of the succession, and that has to be there. So the question then is, why is that there? Well, let's go back to the earliest church, right? If we're going to go the middle way of Anglicanism, let's go back to the earliest church and see how they were missionary bishops. And those missionary bishops would go and they would evangelize the pagans, and they were called the people of the countryside. And that's what pagan means, is the villagers. And the bishop would be set in the cathedral, and the cathedral would be the place from which the church plants would emanate. This is not new for us. This is just a return to the old ways where missionary bishops lead out in missionary strategies to plant churches. So when I hear Bob Duncan say we want to plant 1,000 churches, he sure sounds to me a lot like the 3rd century, and I'm excited about what's going to happen. And so it's turning to the old ways. It's paleo-orthodox, it's the middle way, and I think God can do it in some powerful ways.
A bishop just tweeted in, I need to actually ask this question. We'll wrap with this one.
See, again, the difference between you and me. The bishop tweets, we ask that question.
Well,
go ahead.
Exactly.
Go ahead, I'm good.
It might be
if I believed in bishops, I'd take yours. You got good people. And
it was a great question. Segue.
Yeah.
What in our heritage, what in our Anglican heritage that you know of, is uniquely aligning us to specifically reach the next generation? What are attributes that we have that you say you've got to run with those in your church plants, because those are actually valuable, sustainable attributes for church planting in this culture?
I think that's a great question. And one of the things that when I look at Anglicanism and its opportunity now, I see a culture, and Robert Weber, talks about it some, and you guys, you guys got him and others, and I think right now, I think for many of you, matter of fact, I'm interested, let me do a quick survey here. How many of you were active believers in other traditions before you came into Anglicanism? Raise your hand for a second. Okay? Now, I want you to notice that for just a second. Here's what I would say. There is an appeal among many evangelicals for a more rooted faith. There is appeal of many evangelicals for more a deep expression of liturgy built around the Eucharist and other things. And we actually see that in low church Protestants. We see this very, very frequently. And what I would say is that many, I think of Francis Beckwith. Francis Beckwith was the head of the Evangelical Theological Society, who then converted to Roman Catholicism, which seems to be a conflict of interest if you're the head of the Evangelical Theological Society. But he converted over to Catholicism. What I would say is there's a hunger among a lot of people for that. Now, what I would say is also a danger for that, right? This is how Pentecostalism lost its stride in the 80s and the 90s in the United States. It lost its strides because all it started doing was getting low church evangelicals, and it quit reaching lost people, which so was passionate about in its early beginnings. So I'd say there's a danger to that. Look at Antiochian Orthodoxy today. They've had all the Frankie Schaeffer flood and all those people come in, and it has not produced a church planting movement by anybody's estimation. It's just not there. There's not evangelistic passion. There's not church planting efficacy, none of that. So what I would say is that's your strength. What I would say is that unchurched people, they're not looking for messages on here are 5 ways to have a happy life and 3 ways to raise obedient pets and some of that practical over stuff. And so if you can engage them in a faith that is both beautiful, that is biblical, that is rooted historically, and that calls them to a life-changing mission and transformation, I think that it can make a difference. Bishop Duncan mentioned a few minutes ago, and I wrote it down because I really liked it. He added a fourth one because he talked about the tradition, the word, tradition, and spirit. And those words have kind of changed over the years as I've kind of journeyed with you. But the word, tradition, and spirit, he added society, and I really like that as the fourth thing. What I would say is that resonates well to a world that wants to be deeply spiritual. I call it the Oprahification of American spirituality. The world wants to be deeply spiritual, but they want this sort of free-floating, unrooted spirituality until they see what a real life change can happen that's rooted in the Word of God and that changes everything.
Absolutely.
So I'm encouraged for you, and I'll pray with you.